Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to investigate a massive historical and theological mystery that is hiding right in plain sight in the very first chapters of Genesis. We're looking at the foundational moments of human existence, and we've got to ask a really intriguing question. Did God actually make a formal, legally binding covenant with the very first humans? I mean, it sounds like a simple yes or no, right? But getting to the bottom of this requires us to do some serious ancient historical detective work.
So here is the absolute crux of our mystery. If you read through the entire Genesis creation story, you're going to search in vain for the actual word covenant. It's just not there. Because of this, some modern scholars, like John Walton, make the argument that without that specific word, there just isn't a formal agreement. They basically say, hey, if the text doesn't explicitly call it a covenant, we probably shouldn't either. But think about that for a second. Is the absence of a specific word really the same thing as the absence of the concept? That's the exact question setting the stage for our investigation.
Now, over the centuries, theologians have tried to untangle this in a few different ways. Take the classic 17th century Westminster Confession. It famously lumped everything into two massive categories. You had a covenant of works for Adam before the fall, and a covenant of grace for everyone after. But as biblical scholar Dr. Jeffrey Niehaus points out, that doesn't actually align with ancient Near Eastern history at all. Look, in the 17th century, they just didn't know how ancient treaties worked. They did their best with what they had. But today, we've got modern archaeology and historical context on our side to give us a much more accurate model.
To fix this historical mismatch, Dr. Niehaus proposes a much clearer two-part framework. First up, he introduces what he calls common grace covenants. These are overarching arrangements given to absolutely everyone on the planet, regardless of whether they believe in God or not. Both the Adamic arrangement at creation and the Noahic agreement after the flood fall squarely into this bucket. Their primary purpose isn't actually spiritual salvation. Instead, they're basically designed to just keep the planet running. They set the ground rules for humanity to be fruitful, to multiply, to subdue the earth, and, well, to face the natural consequences of mortality. Now, this common grace is distinctly different from special grace covenants. These are the agreements that kick off a bit later in the biblical timeline, starting with Abraham, then moving through Moses and David, and finally culminating in the New Testament's New Covenant. These are completely and entirely focused on God's program of salvation. So by separating out the physical mechanics of running the world from the spiritual salvation of the world, we instantly get a much cleaner, far more historically accurate picture of what's actually happening in the text.
Right, so if the Adamic arrangement is actually this foundational common grace covenant meant for all of humanity, we are brought right back to our central mystery. We've got to ask, how do we find solid proof of it in the text when the word covenant is completely missing? How do we know for sure that we aren't just projecting our own modern theological ideas backward onto Genesis?
Well, to solve this, we need a historical decoder ring, and that decoder ring is the 2nd millennium BC Hittite treaty form. Picture this. Back in the ancient Near East, these massive empires were ruled by a suzerain, basically an ancient sovereign or a great king, like a hugely powerful Hittite emperor. This suzerain would conquer or ally with lesser local kings, who were known as vassals. And to officially structure this new power dynamic, the suzerain wouldn't just shake hands, he would set up a highly formalized, legally binding treaty. To really wrap our heads around this today, think about your typical modern workplace. Just like an ancient suzerain gave a vassal a kingdom, resources, and rules to rule by, your modern boss gives you a cubicle, a laptop, and very clear job requirements. In both of these scenarios, there are clear blessings for success, you keep your kingdom or you get a pay raise, and there are strict curses for failure, like losing your land or getting fired. The Genesis creation story is describing exactly this kind of power relationship.
Now, these ancient 2nd millennium Hittite treaties weren't just casual back-of-the-napkin agreements. They always included very specific, highly structured legal elements. They had a title introducing the great king, a historical prologue detailing what he's done for the vassal, stipulations the vassal had to follow, witnesses to the agreement, and of course, the blessings and curses. But what's absolutely fascinating here is that Moses, who traditionally authored Genesis, was raised as a prince of Egypt. He would have been completely trained in this exact diplomatic structure, because Egypt and the Hittites were constantly making treaties using this very format.
So the crucial point is right here. When we take those ancient Hittite treaty elements and map them directly over Genesis chapters 1 and 2, we find what is practically a mathematically perfect match. For the title, Genesis 1:1 introduces God as the creator. And remember, in the ancient world, being the creator meant you were the absolute king. For stipulations, we clearly see the commands to be fruitful, multiply, and subdue the earth. God is literally structuring the reality in which his new royal vassals, Adam and Eve, are going to live and work.
But a treaty really isn't a treaty without consequences. In Genesis, God specifically blesses the seventh day, creating a rhythm of rest and blessing. But he also issues a really stark curse warning. Adam is explicitly told not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or he's going to die. It is a clear, legally binding power relationship. It is all the structural guts of an ancient treaty, doing the exact job of a covenant without ever needing to drop the specific word.
And the proof definitely doesn't stop there. Further evidence pops up just a few chapters later in the Noah covenant. When God speaks to Noah, the Hebrew idioms used are Natan Berit and Hakim Berit. As Dr. Niehaus highlights in his research, these idioms translate much better as putting into effect or causing to stand. This is a huge clue. It strongly suggests God isn't creating a brand new agreement out of thin air here. He's renewing and causing a pre-existing arrangement to stand. And what was that pre-existing arrangement? It had to be the one made with Adamic creation. This specific language is absolutely deliberate. In the Old Testament, the usual everyday phrase for making a special grace covenant is cutting a covenant. They would literally cut animals in half, symbolizing that the vassal could be cut off or killed for disobedience. But think about it. You can't be cut out of a common grace covenant like the Adamic or Noahic ones. We all live, breathe, and ultimately die under the physical laws of this planet, whether we choose to obey God or not. That is exactly why the text deliberately uses putting into effect instead of cutting. Fast forward centuries later, and we can clearly see that the biblical prophets fully understood this. They acted as witnesses to this ancient treaty. Just listen to this incredible realization from Jeremiah chapter 33. He explicitly uses covenantal terminology to describe God's decrees over the day, the night, and creation itself. He actually calls it a covenant with day and night. He is looking directly backward at Genesis 1 and recognizing that the very fabric of the created order was bound together by a legal, covenantal framework.
Finally, when we get to the New Testament, the whole structure just locks into place perfectly. The Apostle Paul famously presents Jesus as the second Adam, and the writer of Hebrews calls Jesus the ultimate covenant mediator. Well, logically, if the second Adam is a covenant mediator who brings about a totally new creation, it strongly implies that the first Adam originated this identical role for the first creation. Adam wasn't just some guy hanging out in a garden. He was the primary mediator of a global treaty on behalf of the entire human race.
Which brings us to the end of our historical investigation. We've decoded the ancient Hittite structure, we've traced the ancient linguistics, and we've solved the mystery of the missing word. But it leaves us with a profound, real-world question to ponder. If the very blueprint of creation is actually an ancient binding treaty, an arrangement that places every single one of us as a royal vassal, tasked with subduing and caring for this earth, how are we actually fulfilling those original stipulations today? Are we acting like responsible stewards of the suzerain's kingdom? It's something to deeply consider. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep your curiosity alive.